morning, everybody. Welcome to your new favorite show, Current Condition. I am Bethany Rue, and I'm actually coming at you live today, well, taped by the time you see it, from Lexington, Kentucky. I'm here visiting the in-laws, the land of Andy Bashir, my new favorite governor, Noah Franz Wolf. And I'm joined, as always, by Bethany Hallam, and today's very special guest, editor, publisher, and founder of Pittsburgh Current, Mr. Charlie Deach. Hello, everybody.
Thank you for having me, ladies.
Well, to be honest, we just couldn't get anybody else. So.
I know. That's what I was asked for names for guests, and when none of them answered the phone, they made me come on.
No, Charlie, I miss you. It's so good to see your face.
I don't mind being in talent. I don't mind being in talent relations.
No. Honestly, for all of the media-related things that we have to talk about today, you are a fantastic guest, and thank you for agreeing to join Bethany and I. A couple things, too, I'd like to mention. Make sure you're getting your digital edition of Pittsburgh Current. The new one just came out yesterday. Go sign up on the website to have it delivered fresh to your inbox if you haven't already. And if you don't catch us Wednesday at 9 when we are going to air this, you can always download and listen to us on Spotify, Apple iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or watch us on YouTube. If you caught last week's episode, we had Liv Bennett on with Bethany Hallam, and they were talking about some new legislation that they were introducing, and there was a county council meeting about it last night. And Bethany, would you like to fill our readers/viewers/listeners in on how that went?
Oh, it was a joy. So basically, myself and Councilwoman Bennett drafted legislation to ban the use of tear gas, rubber bullets, flashbang grenades, and beanbag rounds by anyone in Allegheny County. So the legislation was introduced last night, and we had planned to motion to waive the second reading, which basically, for anyone who doesn't spend their time watching county council meetings, what that means is that we, with a 2/3 majority vote, which is 10 votes, we decide not to send the legislation to committee, and we instead bring it up for a vote in the same meeting that it's introduced. So that was our intent. I think, Bethany, we had even talked about that, how we were going to try to do that. And then what happened was, when the meeting came, it was announced that there were 288 public comments submitted about the legislation, which is amazing, which is definitely the most we've had since I've been there. And there were 268 comments in support of the legislation and 20 comments that were against the legislation. And so, because there were so many, the administration had decided that they would not read all the public comments, that they would just read the names of those who were in support and those who were in opposition to it. So the problem is, because of the Sunshine Act, which basically is about transparency in government, it says that the only way that you're allowed to not read public comments at the meeting that they were submitted for is under the condition that, one, they are put into the record for anybody who pulls up meeting minutes in the future, but also, and this is the point that we were arguing about, also, they have to be sent to every elected member of the body. And so that's where we had the mess up, because we only received about 50 or 60 of those comments sent to us ahead of time, when there were 288 in total. And so I just couldn't, in good faith, I wouldn't have been able to sleep at night if I knew that we brought something up for a vote that the rest of council had not had the opportunity to see. Even I had not had the opportunity to see all the comments. So that's basically what happened. There was a lot of back and forth. At the end of the day, they ended up sending us the comments late last night or early this morning. But the problem is, when there's an agenda item, we open it up to public comment to, stay in compliance with the Sunshine Act. And the intent of the language of the Sunshine Act is to make your elected officials accessible to the public. And so that's the of the public comment session, and posting the agendas ahead of time, is making sure that we know how our constituents feel about these issues. So the fact that, the overwhelming majority of the comments were never sent to any of us is a big problem and a big cause for concern. And I worry about the horrible precedent this sets. Are you telling us that we should not be advocating for the community to give their input to county council meetings? Because to me, that's the exact opposite of what I want. To me, co-governing is about having everybody's ideas and voices coming to the table, and everybody having the opportunity to hear them. So
so let me ask you this. Did they not want to read the comments just because there were so many of them? Is
Well,
that-
that's the thing. They don't actually have to read them. That is definitely the reason they didn't want to read them, is because there
Okay.
were 188. But if you're not going to read the comments at the meeting, you have to send copies of the comments to every member of council prior to the meeting, and that's what they did not do.
Okay.
And so they just randomly picked 50, 60 comments and sent them out to us and didn't send us the rest of them. And
Well, that's so nice of them. Wow, real solid move, guys. Thanks.
yeah, and so what ended up happening is, instead of us motioning to waive the second reading, we decided to let it get sent to committee. And that's where a bill about the public safety about protesters and crowds in the street was sent to the Health and Human Services Committee, which is another cause for concern, because this is about public safety. No one will ever argue where this bill should have been. But instead, I believe that there were some higher powers involved in that decision-making process, and it was sent to a committee that is chaired by a conservative Republican member of council, and I think that was very intentional, because we all know that Councilmember Bennett is the one who chairs the Public Safety Committee, which is where this legislation belongs.
What was the rationale for that decision? Did they have one, or were they just like,
yeah,
deal with it?
They said that the way that the heading of the legislation was that it belonged under Health and Human Services. And so, hey, if we have to reintroduce the legislation under a new heading to get it where it belongs, I guess that's what we're going to have to do. But at the end of the day, we have seen instances over and over again since the freshman members of council have been sworn in, where it just seems like attempts at bullying. You guys don't know what you're doing. We know the rules better than you do, but joke's on you, because we have been educating ourselves and we are prepared. So don't mess with us.
That's right, Sunshine Act. Boom.
Yeah.
You know what the worst part is? They don't even come up with new tricks anymore. I mean, that's one of the oldest things ever, is to put it in a committee where, I mean, that's what Daryl Metcalf's job has been in Harrisburg for 10 years, was to chair the governance committee, which literally could be about any topic, and things would go there and die. And that's what I would think they're doing here. What kind of support did you have, Bethany, just through conversations? What kind of support did you have?
Like members of the public, I mean, I think the numbers of public comment overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Like I said, out of 288 public comments, 268 of those were in support of the legislation. And so also, I read the opposition arguments as well, both on social media and the public comments that were sent to us. And, I think that is always something that's important in developing any strategy about passing meaningful legislation. A lot of the against of the opposition public comments were like people typing in all caps and yelling at me and telling me I'm an idiot and I need to resign. There was a lot of references.
Sorry, I sent that in.
No, I knew it was you, Sean.
No.
Bethany, that's what you were doing in our group text this morning. Yeah. You were all capsing us.
But there was also some folks who were worried about that this would ban the use of the little pink pepper sprays that people have on their keychains, personal protection. There was some people that reached out worrying that would be banned as well. But the language was very intentional that it's for use of crowd control only. But it was very disappointing. But again, I think we're prepared to move forward, and we understand the challenges that are ahead of us. And again, I think it's really important to note too that the job of the president of council, he has free reign to put any piece of legislation in any committee he wants. So the argument that this had to go in one committee over another is completely false. If he wanted to place it into the education committee, he could have did that. That is the authority of the president of council, and that's why you elect someone who is going to be impartial. And so I'm just, disappointed overall how it turned out. But again, this is just the beginning. It was just introduced. Now we have a few weeks to get it in committee and get everybody's questions answered and make sure that we have the 8 votes that we need to pass it.
What about amongst your colleagues? Did you have any early sort of idea of where some, at least some of your colleagues stood?
I would say that we definitely didn't have the 8 votes yet, which was another reason why we were like, okay, maybe we should rethink the waiving of the second reading. But my argument is that a lot of the folks who are against this legislation or any piece of legislation, their minds aren't going to be changed with more information, with testimonies in the committee. To me, it seems that the purpose of the committee for most situations, there are some situations like our paid sick leave legislation where it is great to get everything, all the kinks worked out and get everything done the right way.
Yeah.
But with a lot of these situations, they just send it to committee to hope that it dies.
Right.
And like you said, with Daryl Metcalf, I mean, that's very obviously the intention a lot of times. So I am disappointed how last night ended up, but again, I think it's really important that we're always fighting for transparency and accountability in government, you know, especially in times when we're asking that of our police officers, we need to be asking that of ourselves as well on elected office. So.
Yeah. And also, Charlie, I asked the questions here. Stop asking questions.
Sorry. You put me on a mic and I got.
I know. He literally can't help himself. No, there was
freedom of the press.
Well, and you know, Charlie, actually, I'm glad you brought that up. Great segue. The other thing that we really wanted to take a dive into today is, you know, if you've been paying attention at all, there's been quite a lot of kerfuffling in the local Pittsburgh media, specifically coming out of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. They had a letter from Keith Burris this morning that I thought, well, who cares what I think? So Charlie, do you kind of want to start diving into that one? Let's segue to the media.
I feel like there should be a title card that flashes in front. Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I have long called Keith Burris a right-wing lackey, and he is. John, look, he's John Block's lackey, and there's no. I've been writing about the guy now for 2 years. But let's go back to the reason is racism horseshit editorial that they wrote in 2018, where basically they called, you know, using the label of racism, new McCarthyism, and that reminded me this morning. So I read the letter, and just to paraphrase, and you guys we can break over the specifics of the letter if you want to break it down like a Zapruder film or something. But basically, he said that, you know, that it's just a quick synopsis, obviously. Reporter Alexis Johnson and photographer Michael Santiago, two African-American reporters for the photojournalist and a journalist for the Post-Gazette were taken off of coverage of the protest because of an awesome tweet that Alexis sent over the weekend. Basically, and it basically said, look at the mess left behind by all the looters. And it was actually a photo from the Kenny Chesney concert where all the garbage was left. And really, you know, the whole point of that, I mean, it was a really smart commentary because, you know, everyone is like, oh my God, you know, we're having protests and you know, there's going to be looting and pillaging. And I mean, nobody cares when it's a, you know, white man up there singing and people throwing garbage around.
I think people do care about it. I mean, there's a lot of people outraged about the Kenny Chesney concert every year for multiple reasons. But to me, that was the best kind of commentary because it was
but nobody's getting arrested for doing something like that.
Right, exactly. Yeah, nobody's getting in trouble for it. But to me, it was the best kind of commentary because it was undeniable, right? And it was funny, and it was, you know, it wasn't, you know, it was such a palatable way to get that message on. I honestly think it was one of the smartest tweets I've seen in a very, very long time.
Yeah, it was great. It was incredible. And so they were both taken off of coverage. The leadership, executive editor Keith Burris, the owner John Robinson Block, who has shown himself both have shown themselves time and again to have right-wing leanings, which, listen, we're all free to believe how we want, but you know, when I see two people in charge of one of the largest newspapers in the country, you know, they almost endorsed Trump in 2016, for Christ's sakes. I mean, it was a foregone. I mean, that's fact. That almost happened. They're trying to say that the union is trying to use this as a negotiating tool. The union doesn't have to use this as a negotiating tool. I mean, this is a labor battle that's stretched on for years. They haven't had a raise in 14 years, and you know, that's something that you handle in negotiations. But this was something different. And anyone who has, every time the Post-Gazette does something like this, they want you to look at it, you know, they want you to look at it through a very narrow view. They want you to look at what they're writing right now, what they're saying right now. But first of all, a lot of what they say at the moment is horribly and biased. But when you take the reason is racism, when you look at the fact that Rob Rogers was fired and they brought in this other comic, I haven't even learned his or cartoonist, I haven't even learned his name because his stuff is so sexist and racist.
Yeah.
And then you take the reason is racism article. And then today I tweeted, it reminded me of a story that I wrote in 2018 after that editorial that I happened across something from 2013 from the Toledo Blade, which is the other paper that Block's on. And John Block, the Toledo Blade, was sponsoring a sort of a community conversation on race and immigration and so forth. Not immigration, it was race. Reason is racism was about immigration. Sorry, but anyway, the writer who no longer worked for the Blocks, he did a story in which John Block did the interview, approved the interview, but basically John Block said that Black people needed to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. This is 2013. So you take all this information, and it's just, number one, I think their leanings. I think that a realistic argument can be made that they make decisions based on race, whether they want to admit it or not, or whether they want to look at it or not. I feel like there's enough evidence out there. They call these claims baseless and defaming. Well, like I'll make the argument. I'd be glad to make the argument. But it's just they've taken this great brand and just turned it basically into crap at the moment.
And
so go ahead, Bethany. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. So I actually pulled up the article that was written by Keith Burris. And I just think it's really important that we point out, on top of, excuse me, everything Charlie said, it's important that we look at how this, it doesn't say it's an op-ed, but this is very clearly an op-ed by Keith Burris in his own paper, right? Okay,
right.
So
or like an open letter, I think is how he's hoping.
An open letter, right, is what truth, fairness, and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, which to me the headline is an oxymoron in itself, right?
Right.
And so based off everything we've seen, based off what Charlie just mentioned, and that was, a point from a few years ago, and everything that we've seen. So now I read this entire letter, and I want to start out with what the letter starts out with, and I think that this is really important. Let's start with this, is what it says. Editors at this newspaper did not single out a Black reporter and a Black photographer and ban them from covering Pittsburgh protests after the killing of George Floyd. Now, we have seen evidence to the contrary of what he claims in this. We have seen both Alexis and Michael. I've been following it, as I'm sure you all have, on Twitter, along with everything they're saying, like a step-by-step update. I've been seeing instances from other Post-Gazette reporters who were also not allowed to cover the protest as well. And we've seen it wasn't just them being reassigned or fired or whatever they're saying it was. There's been in most instances, no communication between the Post-Gazette staff and their journalists. But also, if you remember, and maybe one of you can speak better to this, but I think it's really important that we talk about the fact that the links were actually removed, because the claim that they go on to in this letter is that they were never assigned to these stories. And that was the whole point. But in reality, there were articles that were written by these folks that were posted on the Post-Gazette and then removed. So there were who were screenshotting articles like, hey, it was there before. There were also instances of photos that the reporters used for their articles being changed by the staff of the Post-Gazette.
Right.
And so I think that that's really important. And I do urge people to go and read this letter, because in my opinion, based off what I've seen and what I've heard from the journalists, photographers at the Post-Gazette, everything in this story by Keith Burris is completely
bullshit.
It is bullshit. Yeah.
So that brings up two things. One, I've seen a lot of people, a lot of leaders in our community saying, don't even click on this story. Don't give them the links. That like this is such a complete pile of crap. Don't even bother. And the other thing I've seen bandied about quite a bit is the word gaslighting. Yes. What the Post-Gazette is trying to do is they're trying to gaslight people. They're trying to gaslight the situation, revisionist history. I would also argue they're definitely not the only publication in the city that engages in this type of behavior. But Charlie, how do you feel? What about this whole concept of gaslighting? Do you think that's what they're trying to do? Or do you think this is really in their heart of hearts what they believe?
I think it's both. no, I mean, you can't look at the history of what Keith Burris has written and not believe that, he believes this nonsense that he spews. And be it, did he always feel this way? Maybe not. It's obvious that John Block. Now, let me say this. I want to say that he said in this article that that newspaper and the Block family had a history of covering the civil rights movement, and they've done a lot for the civil rights movement. That's true up until the John Block, Alan Block era. And
exactly.
Remember, back at the Reason is Racism article, the entire family came out and said John Block doesn't speak for us. John Block is, and he, again, this is the guy that I broke the story. He was hanging out with Donald Trump on his private plane during the 2016 election. I mean, like a smitten schoolgirl in 1975 partying on the Who's tour bus. I mean, it's like it was crazy stuff. And so yeah, no, I believe they believe it to a point, but the pomposity that they use, they're just so like, how dare you, sir? I was right there. I mean, that's the sort of idea that you get, and there are a lot of things in there. Number one of the problems that we've had is there's this, and he said it again. He said in there, and I'm pulling it up in front of me, but he said in there that about historically what the role, you need to be fair and you need to be truthful, and I agree with that too. I agree with truthful, and I agree with accuracy, and I agree with giving everybody a chance to speak. But you can't, the time for us just to be chroniclers of the situation in the traditional sense has passed. Yeah. We've never, like, we would oftentimes report, well, if I'm at a scene, I would report what I saw. But there would be nothing else. Like I would say, I saw a guy punch another guy at the protest. I wouldn't write about sort of the feelings, maybe the things that were said leading up to it. It would just be, here are two sides, you decide what's right and what's wrong. Well, that's not, if I'm there, I need to be able to, put context. You have to be able to put context to these stories. And he obviously doesn't believe that. And there are a lot of old-time journalists who don't believe that. But I've worked for some admittedly conservative newspaper companies, and they have never been as wrong, or they've never been as crazily right-winged as the Block Burris combo. And I worked for the Nutting family, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
And it was these, and they're crazy. They're nuts on this stuff, but still,
literally in their name.
Yeah, they are nuttings. They're nutting to me anymore.
So let's go back to that tweet, Charlie, because that's actually a really good point. So let's go back to Alexis's tweet. They're saying it showed bias or whatever. To what, and Bethany, this kind of applies to you too. With social media and a lot of these old people like John Block, they're just not hip to what social media is these days, and I don't think they understand it or are comfortable with it. I mean, do you think the journalists and public figures, don't they have a right to have a little bit of play in their own social media and what they're putting out there?
I think so, and I also think that it goes to Charlie's point is like there were no falsities in that.
Right.
There were no falsities. Those were pictures. They were not altered. They were pictures that Michael Santiago took, and Alexis posted them. And she said,
and I don't think it showed bias at all, but they clearly did.
Nothing. It was biased. Nothing was false. And so that's what I think is more important than ever, especially when we're talking about our climate, like our political climate that we're in right now. We are seeing a secret police in the streets in riot gear. We are seeing a president who is calling on the military to come into each state, telling any governor that defies that order is being called out by our president. And now we're seeing censorship in the media. And to me, when you look at all of those pieces, they all fit into this dynamic of what the president is doing to our country right now. And I think that this is just, once you lose the free press, once you lose your media to government control, we are no longer a democracy. We are no longer a free country. The media, just like voting, media is a cornerstone to any fair and accurate democracy. And so the fact that we are seeing someone who has made public his affiliations with the person who's sitting in the White House right now, and that person is running a newspaper, which, as Charlie mentioned, is one of the largest in the entire country, and he is exerting control over it and prohibiting the journalists from doing their jobs, and their jobs is to report on the news. And to me, the tweets that were posted and the pictures that were posted from the Kenny Chesney concert show the destruction from a concert that the city continues to invite back year after year. And to me, the streets in that situation looked a hell of a lot worse than the streets after any protest that we've had in Pittsburgh over the past few weeks, or any time that I can remember.
Yeah, but I can't. By the way, I can't wait to get all the angry Barefoot Nation comments that we pissed off.
What's Barefoot Nation? I don't know.
Oh my God, that's what the Kenny Chesney followers call themselves. Like, if you've seen those pictures, I wouldn't go anywhere near that shit barefoot. Like, no way.
I was like 16, getting underages in the parking lot.
She never made it into the show.
No, maybe once or twice, but that's the thing, is most of these people, these are not, a lot of them, remember too, aren't concert goers. A lot of those folks just go down to the concert, tailgate, and leave the mess behind. And so that's something that we have to talk about too.
All right, so Charlie, moving over the bias question to you, and I know you're very active on social media too. To what extent does your personal tweets, does it impact your ability to be an objective chronicler of what's happening? No,
and that's the thing too. Like, I don't think I don't think it's our job to just be. I think we need to be. I think objective is. That doesn't mean that you can't take both sides. Just, you know. And again, like there was a move, especially maybe 10 years ago in our business, where people would just, especially, no offense to like reporters just out of college, but because database reporting is so important. But the idea was, let's get a bunch of numbers and let's just throw them out on the website. Well, I would say, you know, so what's the story? You've got to have context. It's our responsibility to put context into things. So I think that I can be objective by, you know, I'm being objective listening to both stories. And when I'm reporting a story, no matter who you are, you're reporting what you see. You're reporting what you interpret. You can't, you know, nobody ever just, if that were the case, then if that weren't the case, we would just put quotes. We would just put an endless run of quotes, you know, in a story. And it doesn't work that way. I mean, we're trained to take and process and to do research. And I mean, I can be an expert. If you give me a day, I could be an expert on any topic for 20 minutes. And that's what I've done for like my entire career.
You've been a living from that, Charlie.
Yeah, no. And that's totally our job. And so, you know, it's our job to question. It's not just our job to report. We don't just take notes. We're not stenographers. You know, we're journalists, and that's why even the word reporter sometimes. And I tend to use the word journalist more often these days, because I think it is important to have that differentiation of someone who's just spewing back information that they copy down, and someone who's actually doing research.
Or just like embedding tweets as a story or something. Yeah,
like, no. And I'll say this, that one of the most disturbing things is, you know, and it's the whole fight to be first. But, you know, we read a lot of stories that are just tweets. It's taking everyone else's tweets and turning it into a story. If that's the case, they have apps that do that. Storify, you can do that on an app, and you can, you know, if you want to save money on your newsroom, just hire somebody to go through tweets and to put them in order. Yeah, I'll lay off the rest of the staff and start doing that.
Sorry, Jake.
Well, and myself. That's it. But yeah, there's just reporting has changed so much, and our business has changed so much. And I think that one of the things, Bethany H, right? You're Bethany Hallam, is that correct? Nice to meet you, by the way. What you started looking through. So there's this, so pronouns, for example. So if I'm writing the AP rule, I don't know if this is still the AP rule, because I don't follow the AP rule when it comes to this. If you're talking generally about a single individual, like where I would say they, you know, like how to paint a house, they would get a brush. AP style had always been he. And Keith Burris uses that in there when he refers to a journalist in a scenario that he puts. He uses the word he.
It's universal, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know what the Post-Gazette's pronoun policy is. But I know when
I would imagine non-existent.
right. What and I'll say this: it's tough to crack these rules that have been in place forever that we've all followed. When I was at a previous job that shall remain nameless, when I was editor,
that's how they feel about you too.
Yeah, exactly. The question had come up, and it's something I wasn't the editor, but I always believed in using pronoun of choice. I always believed in that, but AP style was purely against it. And when I took over, I made a decision that we would use they as a singular pronoun. And again, where I was working, very, very liberal. Everyone in that room was as liberal as you could get. But there were still journalists there who had a very hard time adjusting to that thought because it's just not grammatically correct. It's not correct. And I think that holding to these old rules, that's why we don't have so many people are disqualified from taking a lot of jobs, but this job in particular, because there is this culture that you have to write a certain way. You have to speak a certain way. You have to be able, in my mind, if you can express what happened, if you can get the words up, I can help. I can clean up that's what the job of an editor. You can get it into some kind of shape. But that's part of the problem of why we don't have real diversity is because we're basing our new employees on this old standard of, what they were looking for in reporters back in the 70s, back when, nobody went to college back in the old days. I mean, this was a trade, journalism, and so you taught it as you went along, and that's something that I would love to do through like almost the new apprenticeship is what journalism should be.
Right.
But yeah, the Post-Gazette has shown nothing in terms of evolution or moving forward in the way that it conducts itself at the top down. Although another old school tactic is sometimes publishers or owners would come in and have drunken tirades at their staff. I think that still has gone on. But it's a sad situation. It really is. I remember there was a time I wanted nothing more than to work for the Post-Gazette when I was a young journalist.
We're actually not surprisingly just went over 30 minutes, but I do have a feeling we could talk about this forever. And we actually have a very special guest coming on next week that we'll tell you more about then closer to the date where we are going to talk more about this. We're going to talk about diversity in media. And, these are conversations that I think we all need to have and keep having, and we can't shut up about it because there are forces at work pushing back on the things that we hold dear, and we really need to make sure that we're all being accountable for making sure that the truth prevails. And now, Bethany, I'm going to throw it back to you for last word. Anything you want to talk about? How much you miss me since I'm in Kentucky?
That's actually what I want my last word to be. I really wish I was in Kentucky with you right now, and I miss you a lot. And I'm glad we have Charlie here, even though he sometimes steals the show.
Yeah, I know, right?
I realized that, by the way.
So just real quick, so talking about media in Kentucky, and I know I fangirled about Andy Beshear, their governor.
Stop with that governor of Kentucky thing. Stop.
Listen, I watched his COVID press conference yesterday, and they're dealing with a very hot, volatile situation. A member of the Kentucky National Guard shot and killed a Black protester, business owner in Louisville, and the way they're dealing with it is incredibly interesting. It's incredibly transparent. It's like nothing I've seen before. So if you have a few minutes, it's worth checking out how they're dealing with things here, because I think Tom Wolf's done a good enough job, and of course we could have talked about what's going on with that, what happened last night till the cows come home. But really, it's just interesting to be in another state and see how they're managing these things. So that's all. I
would be able to see that for myself, but you didn't invite me, so.
Well, we can do that on our Zoom later, okay? Thank you guys so much. Thank you for watching Current Condition, y'all. We always want to hear what you think, what you want to hear talked about, guests you want to see us have on. And again, Charlie, miss you. Bethany, miss you. I'll be back in Pennsylvania tomorrow. So, all right, bye. Thank you again, Jake. We love you.